Islamic State is still unclear. One is a Jordanian pilot, the other a Japanese journalist, and both families have made emotional appeals for their safe return.
Jordan is ready to swap an Iraqi al-Qaeda prisoner for its pilot, but Islamic State is only offering to free the Japanese hostage in return while sparing the pilot's life.
Well, let's talk about developments now with Dr. Evan Lawrence, a security and terrorism expert. Very morning for you. Would you give us your sort of snapshot of where we stand this morning?
Well, I think we're still in the waiting game as to whether the hostage swap is actually going to happen. But I think we're also in a very sticky situation with whether we actually release this prisoner or not. Because if Jordan actually releases the prisoner for a swap for either the Japanese hostage or the Jordanian pilot, it's only going to encourage IS to then ask for more hostages. And possibly ransom and things like that.
And to be clear, the picture that we've just seen of the prisoner is a woman who was a would-be suicide bomber.
Yes,
but
that's correct.
didn't die. Her vest didn't detonate.
Yeah, that's correct.
It brings into question, doesn't it, just when you draw the line, when you give in to terrorists. Yeah. And Japan, I mean, obviously we've already seen one Japanese hostage killed, and that's been verified by the Japanese authorities. But it's about where the lines shift now, because the pressure from the families, the pressure from the media is intensifying.
Yeah, it's very difficult to decide, especially as a government, where that line should be, because you end up certainly paying ransoms and things like that leads to more attacks. It leads directly to funding a terrorist organization, and it also leads to groups taking more hostages from your citizens in response to demanding more and more and more and more. And so you have to really balance that with the hostages' lives, and is it worth one life to save, maybe hundreds more later on?
It's clearly a terrible time for the hostages themselves, for their families and all those involved. This situation is being played out very publicly. There is a timeline, there are deadlines that everyone knows about. That's different from some of the hostage situations in the past, isn't it? And we know the government's money, I was going to say governments have spent money on getting releases. They always say the money has not been paid directly. But it's happened before, but we just didn't follow it in the same way.
Yeah, it has happened before. Japan was one of the countries in the 70s and 80s that did pay ransom demands. They've had prisoners taken before in northern Iraq, or northern Africa. So it is something that they're familiar with. It's not something that they've done since they've been part of the Western coalition fighting ISIS, even though they're only giving humanitarian money to the coalition. But it's certainly something that the Middle Eastern countries are quite familiar with as well. So like I said, it really is just a big debate about how and where that line is.
And we mentioned that the media has covered this. IS, or Islamic State, the media's and the coverage plays into their hands, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, you're in a catch-24 situation. This is an important story. People's lives are at risk here, but we are fueling effectively their propaganda as well. Yeah,
there's been a lot of studies and work done around how much the media plays into terrorist attacks, and what terrorists are now looking for is sometimes more the media attention than anything else. So I think that media and media sources have to be very careful as to how they cover stories as well, which I'm sure you guys are more than familiar with. But you have to be and balance that kind of coverage between the hostages' lives, the demands for ransom, and the news story that it demands to be told. So.
Dr. Evan Lawrence, thank you very much for your time this morning.